So with that, I'm going to introduce General John Olson, who is a mobilization assistant to the Chief of Space Operations and Space Force lead for JADC2 and ABMS. He assists the CSO with responsibility to organize, train, and equip space forces, develop and acquire military space systems, and conduct space operations to advance and protect U.S. allied interests. And then we'll have Robbie Robertson, who will speak for AFRL Space and is the mission lead. I forgot to finish getting your bio there, Robbie. So you're going to have to introduce yourself. And then that was a mess up by my team, myself of not, he did send me the bio, sorry. But, and then we have, well, he's general, but in this role at DIU, he's a Mr. Steve Buteau, who is, but he's also a general in the California Air Guard, right? I'm doing this from memory. Anyway, so he is the space portfolio lead for DIU, does amazing things, and you're going to get to hear a lot from him this week. He is our main leader. We try and keep him happy with all of these workshops and lots of fun to try to get input from industry so that we all can go off and implement some of these recommendations that come from this. So with that, please come up. Sorry, Bucky and Robbie, and then General Olson will be virtual and he's waiting.
All right, good morning. I know I always thought John Olson is probably like an artificial intelligence algorithm. And since now he's virtual, we can hold him a task on that. John, are you up?
I'm all good to go, Bucky. How about you?
Very good. You're first in the queue.
Okay, well, great. We've got my slides up. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. If it has to be virtual, it's better than nothing. I had every intention on being out there, but the Secretary of the Air Force had a really full day yesterday in the operational imperatives. That's the Department of the Air Force's top vanguard changes for the future. And so we had a full day review and it made it impossible to be there for this morning's event. But I wanted to share a little bit of an opening kind of a scene setter. So if we step to the next slide, I think the best way to shape it, since I am coming to you live from the Pentagon, is really today's topic is all about space in New Mexico and how that's absolutely essential to national progress. But true to form, that's a great acronym. It's strategy and planning to accelerate collaborative excellence in national enterprise-wide mission execution and innovation and coordination operations to equal a new approach to integrating our nation's assets, leadership plans, resources, opportunities, and requirements to expand space success. I think that says it all, right? And at the Pentagon, you got to have great acronyms, and I think we had a great one to kick today's activities off. So as we go to the next slide, it's really all about space. As we know, it's essential to our way of life, everything from our weather and banking and navigation and scientific exploration to our market. But it's also vital to our modern way of defending the nation and prosecuting wars. In fact, it is essential. And so the United States must remain the leader in space, along with our partners and allies, to ensure that we have freedom of action and there is definite first mover advantage. And it's critically important that we maintain this leadership. But as we look at the next slide, it's really also an extraordinary time in that we've already had an incredible revolution in space access and the space transportation sector. But as we look at space access, mobility, and logistics, and you got some great speakers today, but as we look at that mobility in, from, to, and through space, it's essential to everything that we're doing. And as we look at this global geostrategic environment, we know that space access, mobility, logistics, and sustained maneuver, these are the new defining or disruptive capabilities that are going to ensure our success going forward. And as we look to unlock what several credible groups have outlined as what may be a $1 trillion space market. It's all about elevating our U.S. and allied capabilities and capacities and expanding our national infrastructure to support these bold and demanding activities. And then finally, it's about enhancing the sustainment and agility and timeliness of our actions along with those. So as we go to the next slide, let's put it in context. Last year, we had roughly a $366 billion economy. So look at 2022, even given the challenges that we had, it's about a $460 plus billion space economy. And that include verticals in manufacturing, launch, and the ground operations and services. Almost every single area is growing. And as you see it regionally displayed, it is a global phenomenon. And as we look at it, given that our economic and our health and national security are so heavily dependent upon space, we got to continue this leadership. So as we look at the next slide, let's look at that. As we look at the United States, we're clearly the dominant investor and spender in this arena, but I think we need to make sure that we are fully leveraging that return on investment and investing wisely so that we maintain that leadership along with our partners and allies. But as we look at the next chart, I think you can see as we look at 2022, the last full year for which we have metrics, since we're about a third, getting to a half of the way through this year, launches are up, small sats, injected mass in all sectors are way above traditional. And so it is an exciting time, but it's also a challenging time because we got to agilely adapt and respond to this continued growth in our sectors across the board in the space ecosystem. Next slide. So as we look at that, it is an ecosystem. When we talk whether it's in space servicing or space exploration and utilization or human space flight or the infrastructure, all the way out to XGO, cislunar and lunar and beyond, plus the in situ R&D and manufacturing for in-space manufacturing. So it is a bold ecosystem with lots of new players. But as we look at the next slide, it's really also one where we have a longer term vision to explore as we look at the civil successes in our NASA brothers and sisters with Artemis 1, and we're excited for Artemis 2 here. That just begins a continued crescendo of activities that will take us out to the moon and beyond. And it really highlights the fact that where we go, where we explore, there's always throughout history been a concordant requirement to protect and defend and ensure those sea lines, if you will, of communication and commerce. Only this time it's going to be space lines of communication and commerce. Next slide. But as we know, it's been a pretty dynamic couple of years, whether it's in the technology, the geopolitical arena, the globalization of the economy, or the tremendous growth, explosive growth, if you will, in data and information and Internet of Things. We've all survived COVID, and we know that cybersecurity continues to remain both a challenge and an opportunity. We see that overlaid with climate change. And as we look across the spectrum of conflict, from competition to crisis to conflict, as the Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, so aptly said, we want to ensure that we stay in enduring competition because that's far preferable to those latter elements. But we've also seen, much like the war in Ukraine is now at day 447 today, that is certainly a kinetic war of attrition, but it is the first war of cognition in space. Particularly non-traditional companies in space have had a disruptive David and Goliath leveling effect. As we look at just Starlink and Maxar and Capella and ICEYE for the tremendous, just to name a couple of names, to look at the tremendous impacts, we see that this is going to define what proliferated constellations in low Earth orbit and other orbits can and will deliver for resilient and effective space architectures. But we know that only real constant is change, and it's also heavily about reusability and sustainability as we continue those trends of explosive mass growth and launches into this very precious domain environment. So We have a strategic opportunity to expand through connectivity, leverage the unlimited resources and power potential, and fully exploit the economic impacts of ex-geo and cislunar for our broader health, economic, and national security. So we got to be quick and we got to be smart. So as we overlay that, we also on the next slide have a bunch of challenges. You know, we've seen that our U.S. R&D expenditures as a fraction or comparatively have been decreasing. The competition for total researchers and patents granted has also become a more of a race as we look at the proliferation of influence around the globe, and the fact that if you look at the numbers, the tip of the mountain for SPAC deals and funding was in that Q1 of 2021. We've had some challenges in our sector across the board. Perhaps it was a little frothy, but as we look at overlaying all that, we got to treat these as pragmatic challenges for which, as we look at on the next slide, from a Space Force perspective, this is my annual 2023 U.S. Space Industrial Base scorecard. Overall, it's about it ignites American launches. But as we look at the sector and area by area breakout for our overall state of the base industrial base scorecard, we know we have a little bit more yellow this year than we did last year. We know that growth continues, as you saw by the objective numbers. I think from an innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship perspective, we're as strong or stronger than we've ever been. But in terms in terms of some of our strategies and as we look at the atmospherics, we know that with inflationary pressures and supply chain challenges, we continue to have atmospheric and market driving challenges along with you know, from an overall executive leadership perspective, we've got great vision, but we have not yet fully achieved all our goals and objectives in those realms. From a risk posture and an incentive structure, I think we can still do a lot more in terms of balancing that equation. Cybersecurity is ever present, and as we've seen the explosive growth of ChatGPT and both 3 and 4, we're also going to see an increasingly proliferated and challenging data cyber environment. Alliances are a bright, shiny spot in that central column. Of course, the coalition of 30 plus countries supporting the Ukraine conflict is evidence of the true capacity and potency of broad international partnerships and alliances. But we've also seen, following that up, that even that is challenging some of our national supply chains as we look at production increases and demands not yet fully able to be met, and that creating a situation there are some supply chain constraints. As we look at the legislation side, there's some good ideas out there, but I think we can do a lot more. This can include third-party liability and indemnification, incentives, tax benefits, and the like. From an accessibility, we continue to have, and we'll see this year, we saw the first flight of Starship. We've seen some incredible efforts by Relativity. We've got Vulcan launch coming up. So it's an exciting time from space access. But as we look at the university side, I think we can still do more. We're looking to stand up the Space Technology Institutes and expand the university partnership program. I think we've seen some new start challenges with this increasing capital constrained market. Competition is certainly up and strong, but the human side, there aren't enough people to go around. And I think that's from a pipeline and training and a retraining and development perspective, still a major player. And as we look at the overall enterprise view and the sustainability of it, I think we still got room to grow there. So overall, the state of the state of the United States space industrial base is really strategically poised for smart action. And by smart, I mean strategic, I mean mission oriented, I mean aggressive, I need resilient and timely action. And I think it's still tactically building. So that's where I personally believe things stand at this snapshot in time in 2023. And as we look at the next chart, how are we getting after turning those yellows to greens? And so in the Space Force, our job is to protect U.S. and allied interests in space. And we do that across the board with our Guardians and our airmen across the total force side of the house to org, train, and equip our forces to conduct those missions. And as you may have seen yesterday, our Chief of Space Operations is looking to publicly solicit and garner the best and brightest ideas to further refine our mission statement so we can exactly nail it for the present and the future. As we look at the next slide, we're getting after that responsibility by underpinning it with doctrine. And our space power doctrine is what guides and articulates how we are differentiating military power and capability to preserve our freedom of action, to enable joint lethality and effectiveness, and to give us options at the national leadership level that span that spectrum of conflict or that continuum of conflict, so that we can continue the prosperity and security that we depend on space for. Next slide. And so that doctrine, and I want to call it out here, is underpinned. One key and important part that I mentioned up front is our space access, mobility, and logistics, or SAML. And that's a core part of what we're doing. And what you see, and you'll get Dr. Ezine Uzo-Okoro talking later today, but we've got now the U.S. national policy on in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, plus the implementation plans. We're implementing those in the Space Force, the Air Force Research Laboratory, and the Department of Defense across a multi-pronged approach. And this is vitally important to the way that we see the future will best support our mission objectives and our leadership objectives there. Next slide. But as we look at that, where do we want to be? What's our vision for space access, mobility, and logistics in 2030? And right there in front and center is no longer are we talking about maneuver without regret. We're really shifting the phraseology to something that I think is much more appropriate and enduring, and that is sustained space maneuver. The ability to move and have agile, dynamic operations whenever and wherever needed. And I think this is vitally important, as this is a core tenet of any other domain across the military spectrum. And so this is something that's really important to us. And that also enables orbital repositioning and responsive launch, upgrade and repair, and autonomous rendezvous and prox ops, and docking, and in-flight and mid-flight refueling, and on-orbit assembly and manufacturing, and in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. So it gives us the ability to be dynamic, to be responsive, to be agile, to be defensive, and to leverage offensive and defensive attributes on both sides of the host, not just in geosynchronous orbit and HEO and LEO, but also in cislunar space, XGEO, lunar space, and all the way to the surface, asteroids and Mars and beyond. So that's the long-term view of where we're going to go. And if you will, it's kind of like analogously, we've got the blue water and the brown water Navy, for the brown water being closer to the littoral regions, and the blue being those global soft power and influence and power projection and safety and security and defense of our sea lines of commerce and communication. So too are we going to have the Space Force that is the blue water or the blue and the brown Space Force, looking at geo and below, as well as this broader element of our near solar system. So as we look at the next slide, it's really about building the possibilities. And as we look at that, we know that space is congested and contested. We talked about that ever increasing set of capacity that's there, but it's also our adversaries. And so to get after that, the Chief of Space Operations has said, we're going to have 3 primary lines of effort for the Space Force. First and foremost, it's to field combat ready forces, to take and ensure that our Guardians and airmen are ready for the integrated deterrence and defensive missions that we need, but also to extend that through operational test and training to be ready for offensive and defensive applications. The second one is to amplify our Guardian spirit, which is all about our people, recruiting the best talent, retaining them, and developing them into the first service board digital. And finally, it's about partnering to win. And so if we look at that third line of effort, it's really about business. It's about our joint services. It's about academia. It's about our international partners and allies and our interagency brothers and sisters. And so it means being smart, and it's being great players and continuing to do that across the board. So those are the 3 line of efforts by which we're getting after this very important set of endeavors. And on the next slide, we'll show you how we get there. It's through a campaign approach. Of course, we're now in our third. We're out of the terrible twos in the Space Force. We've had our third birthday on the 20th of December, and we're protecting what we have now, but we're transitioning both through our POM and our budget activities, as well as our operational imperatives, because operational imperative 1 from the Secretary of the Air Force is resilient and effective space architecture. So this is how we're creating those, through empowering a lean and agile service and delivering warfighting capability through world-class teams at the speed of need. And so this is how we're getting after our mission sets. Next slide. So putting that all together, that's how we're getting it. But we know, as I've already mentioned, the joint services, our international partners and allies, our industry partners, all of you are critical, along with academia, our civil, NASA, NOAA, FAA, Department of Commerce, and our intelligence agency partners. All of these elements are vital to ensure we have a total integrated perspective, because space is the largest area of responsibility and it's continuing to grow. Next slide. So as we look at that, here's specifically what we're doing, just in a lightning round. Dynamic space maneuver operations. You already heard that brief from the center of the slides. This is the bright new idea of the current moment, and it's going to continue and endure forever. We've got big plans to build a resilient and effective architecture that will help ensure. We've seen the fruits of that in Ukraine, and we've invested in that. We've got Tranche 0 from the Space Development Agency, which launched in March. We're very excited about that. Going with that is bigger budgets. This year, the budget request is $30 billion. That's 2x where we were 2 years ago, up $4 billion from last year. It's a recognition of the critical importance of this to the nation. As we look at our bold partnerships, we're tickled to roll out the new Space Systems Command Commercial Space Office. It's going to be called Cosmic, and that's going to be out in Chantilly. It's going to tie all of our areas from the front door and the Commercial Space Services Office. It's going to roll all those together. In terms of innovation, we've got these operational imperatives, our force development activities through the Space Warfighting Analysis Center. And we've got our acquisition arms in the Space Systems Command and the Space Development Agency, as well as Space Response, our Rapid Capabilities Office, and the DAF Rapid Capabilities Office. All these things are aligned under a single service acquisition executive, the Honorable Frank Calvelli. And so he's all about brisk execution, shortening those timelines, simplifying the systems, and having a steady cadence every 2 to 3 years to drive responsive and resilient space. And we know that that's all underpinned by people. So we put out the Guardian spirit, our Guardian ideal, and we're working on future paradigms that are going to be absolutely disruptive, like space solar power to enable ubiquitous power across our multi-domain warfighting capabilities. And finally, we're going to be amping up in size with the budget request of another 800 Guardians. That may not sound like much, but with 8,600 active duty folks on board, that's a significant jump. Total, we're still pretty small and lean, 16,500. So we got to bring it strong and bold and smartly. And on the next slide, you'll see that that involves a vision to really stimulate or be a catalyst for our entire U.S. and allied prosperity and protection, well beyond GPS, well beyond missile warning and missile track, well beyond communications and space data transport, to look at those space lines of commerce and communication on a much broader and bright future. So this is the potential. These are the futures in space that we're planning for in the long term. And as we look at that, next slide, please. It's all about partnering. We got to do this together, and we need your input. That's what this whole state of the space industrial base approach is about. This is about garnering your unvarnished direct input, because we use it. And I think this report has gotten an annual reputation of very solidly researched and supported and very actively being used. So I think that's a great place, and you can help contribute to that going forward to make this our 5th year the best and strongest ever. Next slide. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, and I turn it over to Bucky or Robbie, and I really appreciate the opportunity to engage, and I wish I could have been there, but you got the next best thing, virtual. Thank you.